Okay, welcome back and welcome to Unit 5. And we're going to begin Unit 5 with our art historical discussion talking about the Renaissance. And I'm going to try to there's a lot to cover, and I'm going to try to cover it relatively slowly, so not to just pass over things too fast. So we may actually hit 4 videos for this one lecture, and so, but still under 40 minutes. And so there are a couple of main points I want to cover right at the beginning about the Renaissance. Um, Probably the number one point to get from this whole lecture is when we talk about the Renaissance in Europe, we're really talking about two different Renaissances that then kind of combine and influence each other. One being the Northern European Renaissance and one the Italian Renaissance. And they are to a certain degree somewhat independent, especially at the artistic level, kind of independent events. Um, but they do influence each other. And by the time we get to the High Renaissance and the end of the High Renaissance, they're very much influencing and becoming kind of like one event. And then another major point I want everyone to kind of understand is that um, when we talk about the Renaissance, especially in Italy, we really are talking about kind of like two periods. We're talking about the early Renaissance and then the late, which we normally call the High Renaissance. And um, and sometimes the distinction between early and late applies also to the Northern European Renaissance, but mostly to Italy. But also there's a long period of kind of like the late Gothic that you almost, in Italy, you could call more like the Proto-Renaissance, because it's about 100 years of art making before officially the start of the early Renaissance, where a lot of the groundwork was being laid. So that's point number 2. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about why we think the Renaissance started, but really the full discussion of that can be found in the notes as to why we think the Renaissance actually happened, and was the Renaissance a unique and significant event. In a way, this is really kind of like the same discussion as when we had this discussion about the Periclean age or the classical age, that 200-year period kind of centered around classical Greek art and culture and philosophy, centered around Corinth and Athens, and that period. And it's the same kind of question of like, is this truly a remarkable, great event in human history, or do we just feel that way because that's the way the history has been written? And to a certain degree, it's kind of like almost impossible to separate those two things, because certainly the Renaissance has been extremely influential, but that's in part because it's been written as influential. Like all the writers of past times, especially when we get to the Enlightenment, have really referenced that as kind of an important starting point. And so, you know, um, it's a chicken and the egg kind of dilemma. And then the other question of like, why did it start, is similarly kind of answered in the same way that we answered the that question when we were looking at the classical period of Greece. And I think the kind of like all of the above answer in the end really does apply, which is there was to a certain degree this kind of like perfect storm in the perfect place kind of thing. It was partially a commercial explanation that, you know, especially Italy, but certain cities also in Northern Europe, the connection between them, the trade between Northern Europe to Italy, the trade from Italy to Constantinople, the trade to the Near East, right? The exchanging of ideas, um, and the combining of all these different ideas that had been bubbling in the late Gothic period, the importing of ideas of like, there's a lot of classical writing and classical ideas that had been known to the Islamic world, but not known to the European world and got re-imported back into Europe. The discovery of lots of classical art, especially classical sculpture and classical architecture. So a lot of these things, as well as that kind of another example of where we had like this highly competitive commercial city-state model of civic life, and all these different Italian um, semi-independent cities competing with each other, and this leading to a very kind of competitive culture. So it was a cultural explanation, it was an economic explanation, and it was a kind of a philosophical change. And you could look at like late Gothic scholasticism and the development of humanism and the rediscovery of classic, the classics, the literature of classical period. All of this together combines, but in the end, whatever explanation we come up with, it happened. So as I was saying, we're going to start with Italy. And so the early Renaissance generally begins in 1400, but there's kind of this period, which you might see as the very last period of the late Gothic, or you might call it Proto-Renaissance, where we see kind of an explosion in the amount of art in Italy, an explosion in the scale and the craftsmanship of the art made. But this art is still quite conservative and very much influenced from the late Gothic styles of the previous century, as well as influence from styles in the Eastern Orthodox and Constantinople part of the world. And we see that continuing when we actually begin the. Just want to emphasize when we begin the actual start of the early Renaissance. But still here, between 1300 and 1400 CE. And I think Giotto would be the emblematic artist of this kind of proto Renaissance period. And in his career, you can see both examples of that kind of conservatism and a willingness to make very art, especially altarpiece art, that is meant to look like the way art has looked, right? And it's not necessarily meant to change people's perception of what is good painting and what is good, picture making. But then in these fresco paintings, and not just from this particular chapel, but and in a lot of other of Giotto's work, we see a much more adventurous spirit. And it, it's adventurous in the sense that he's pursuing a sense of modeling and a sense of space, like trying to create a relatively deep space, kind of a shallow stage space, but a believable shallow stage space. And he's trying to create this space and trying to create each figure as a physical form and model, and then to model them in light and dark, right? To paint them in such a way that they feel kind of solid, like sculpture. Doing that was for this time adventurous, but at the same time, there's a spirit to Giotto's painting. The thing I love about Giotto's painting is this kind of very kind of still and timeless quality of it that in some ways, when we get to Piero della Francesca, I think we'll see a kind of a similar return to it in a different way. But I love that about Giotto, one of my favorite painters. So by 1400, we really are beginning the early Renaissance. And one of the things that I want to talk about in terms of the early Renaissance is in Italy is this interest in drawing, specifically in perspective, an obsession with perspective, and an interest in figurative drawing and figure studies. And those are the kind of like the two most important things that kind of shape the way the artwork is looking: the desire to make believable spaces and the desire to make figures look believable, and not just when they're like covered in a whole bunch of cloth, but make figures look believable even when they're like partially unclothed, showing that these artists, they're demonstrating that they understand anatomy and the way a figure exists to the same way that the classical Greeks understood. And this is probably a good place for us to stop. That was my 1 minute warning. All right, I'll get back to you with